Welcome, everybody, to the Next Journey podcast. You'll find us battling, as usual, with technology. It's 2024. That means 40 years that I've been exploring the world's most remote places in four-wheel drives, in association with the Overland Workshop. Tell me where you are in the world right now.
Right, so I am just northwest of London in the United Kingdom, a place called High Wycombe.
High Wycombe, right. And I'm, of course, in Western Australia. Those of you who don't know, Richard helped me build my Range Rover, or certainly prepare it for my Trans-Australia crossing. That was in 21, and then the Canning Stock route in 22. And what would you say your specialty is? Because, of course, your channel is Church House Classics, one of my favorite YouTube channels.
Thank you.
Dealing with my favorite car of all
and mine
time.
Too. Yes.
Yeah, so that's fairly obvious. Tell me about what are you? What do you consider yourself to be?
Good question. I've got no formal mechanical training in my background. However, I've been tearing things apart for as long as I possibly remember. My main industry throughout my working life has been in computing, in project management. And I think it's the combination of the disciplines of project management and my mechanical knowledge that I've learned through the knocks of life, through experience, that I've been able to bring together to create a fairly special business that I can run by myself that provides my customers with pretty much exactly what they want. So utilising things like, fault diagnosis, process and organisational skills, and communication skills as well. Really just try and get the best out of the customer, the project, and the way I deliver. If that makes sense.
Almost. So then describe to me your ideal customer.
Enthusiast. Absolute through and through enthusiast.
In what?
In cars.
Cars generally.
Cars generally, yeah. Classic cars. Someone that's got a real interest in... so, for instance, you and I have a passion in two-door Range Rovers. Absolutely love them. They're style icons. So someone comes to me and they have a two-door Range Rover and I can see they're enthusiastic about it. They want me to work on the car. And more importantly, it's a keeper. It's not something they're dressing up just to kind of flip on. I'm less interested in that kind of work. I'm more interested in dealing with the person, with the project, and kind of the whole thing comes together as a package for me.
So you're very much in touch with the client's wishes and desires. So you meet with them face to face and then you get to know what they're really wanting out of the project. And this is something that I find a bit strange because I'm quite bad at that. But you're obviously quite good at it because on your channel you keep churning out these masterpieces. I like to call them masterpieces.
Thank you.
That's just a car, but it's sometimes an enormous amount of work to get them from to.
Yes. The tricky thing is a car comes to me and invariably they're going to be 45 to 50 plus years old. And they're built by British Leyland, which doesn't help to start off with. And I'm not going to go into a big old kicking British Leyland exercise here because it is what it is. However, these cars, they've been through decades of bodges. They've been right down into the doldrums. They've kind of like been worth less than the shirt on someone's back, but they've just been nursed through the years. So when I eventually get hold of a car that a customer wants me to work on, it's very difficult for me to provide a quote against what I can't see, where I'm going to be. And especially in the UK where we use salt on the roads in the winter, it's not uncommon to find 3 or 4 layers of rusty steel where there should be one, and all badly welded together with bits of filler and all sorts. So really all I can do is I can provide an estimate to the customer based on my experiences of what I'm likely to find. And I am surprised sometimes, not very often, but I am surprised that cars are in good condition or better condition than I anticipated. And if I find nasties along the way, then it's a case of discussing the impact of that with the customer. I'm in my business, I'm not prepared to continue with the what we call the MOT patch regime. So just lobbing another piece of metal over a rusty hole so that it passes its annual test. I'd rather cut it out, return back to what was left of, what's left of the car from as it left the factory, and then rebuild it from that point. And as you've seen from the channel, it's not. Well, it looks horrific, but for me, it's very organised. It's very straightforward for me to see how the car should be, where it is at the moment, and then the tricky bit, I guess, for the viewer is to understand how I can logically move from one stage to the other. Sometimes it's just entire panels get replaced, so things like the sills, the bulkhead side panels, and so forth. But these panels are all available. I know which ones are good quality and fit well. I know which ones are trickier to fit, need a little bit more attention, and I know how to do those. So it's become, because I've done many of these things now over the last 4 or 5 years that I've been running the business. I've just built up a skill set inside me that understands, I guess, a bit more about the body structure, and that's just the body. I mean, that's generally the worst bit of any Range Rover in this country is going to be the body frame itself. But it also extends into things like the interior, the electrics, the running gear. You see all kind of modifications. Absolutely no issue at all with modifications if the customer wants me to fit uprated springs or lower the car or whatever. It's their car, it's their wish, and I work to that. But I also will try to make the customer aware of the impact of a modification, whether I feel that that's a positive modification or whether it's just something that's shiny. And it's really about engaging with the customer, really getting down to what it is that they need. And even if they think they need it, they don't always need it. And after discussions, they may change their mind, they may not. But I will continue to work with the customer.
So your skill set includes basically looking at a vehicle, opening and closing the doors, looking inside the panels, and being able to interpret the rust.
Yes.
How deep is it? How serious is it? Is that panel available? Yes, just replace the panel. Not difficult, because you know what spares are available, and you know what spares are not.
Yes.
I'm going to talk Range Rovers here, okay?
Go on then.
What are just plain not available? What is the one thing that you just really struggle with any big Range Rover restoration?
On the early cars, 4-speed gearbox components are tricky to get hold of, and where they are available, they're not necessarily of the right quality. And I've come across this time and time again. So I have to be quite creative when I find parts for gearboxes. I've got about 6 of those 4-speed gearboxes in my workshop at the moment, just all sitting there. I own a lot of them. I don't know how it happened, but I'm there. Anyway, so I've taken one of them apart for bits. So I've salvaged, good quality used parts from those gearboxes, which I then use in a customer's car in order to get the gearbox back into order. Some of the internal components of the gearbox, especially bearings and so forth, I can get them from specialist bearing suppliers, but not through the Land Rover channels, because I've generally found them to be lower quality than those that are available in the marketplace. So it's challenges like that. There isn't anything specifically in Range Rover circles. I guess the bonnet and the roof are panels that are quite tricky to get hold of. So I tend to, roof panels are very difficult to work with because they're Burma-Bright or aluminium. But once that gets dented, it stretches very easily, and then shrinking that aluminium back down to its normal shape is almost impossible. So when I find a roof panel that's perhaps been off-roaded, had some tree branch damage or so forth, it's often easier to replace that panel outright than it is to try and straighten the one that's on the car. Bonnets are a little bit easier because they're steel in construction, and they don't tend to rust as badly as the rear tailgates. So the bonnets I'm able to... I did a video recently where I stripped a bonnet down to its bare bones, took every single component out, so I ended up with the outer skin of the bonnet, which I was able to repair, and then the inner frame, and then it's all just riveted together. So I did a video on that, and the results of that came out very... I wasn't surprised, but I was very pleased with the results. And I've done similar things with, so my other passion is Triumph Stags, and there are a number of panels that are not available for those. Again, the boot lid is not available, and they do rust. And I've taken 2 or 3 panels apart to salvage the best bits and then assemble one good boot lid from all of those parts. If it can be done in the factory, then it can be done by an enthusiast or someone with fairly sort of basic but logical skills. These are not difficult things.
Describe to me the worst car that you've ever had delivered to you and say where the customer said, rebuild it, I don't care. I know it's rotten.
Mm-hmm.
Describe that to me. Have you ever said, mate, you can't, you're polishing a turd here. Sorry. Have you ever got to that situation?
Yes, I have. There's one car that I've had come back to me 3 times with 3 different owners, which was quite amusing. First time it came to me, it's a Defender 90. It's a fairly early Defender 90. It was late 1980s, Defender 90. And someone got in touch with me with an email request saying, just bought it at auction. Are you available just to put a few patches on the chassis for me? Now, in the UK, Defender chassis, they rot from the inside to the outside on the main rails.
Yes.
Probably the same in Australia, same in South Africa, same across the world.
It's worse in the UK because of the salt.
Yeah, once the main rail's gone, that's it.
Yeah.
You've lost the chassis. There are half and quarter chassis available, but they're a pain to put on. And by the time you've taken the body apart to that extent, you may as well have replaced the entire chassis. In the UK, we can do that. I know in other countries in Europe and certainly in the United States, the car's got to retain the majority of its original frame. But in the UK, we have a good supply of brand new chassis that are either just bare steel or they're galvanised. So this car came in. I went to the MOT, the safety annual safety check history on my computer and looked it up, and it was just it read like War and Peace on rust on the chassis. So I got back to him and said, no, it needs a new chassis. And he said, oh, but the MOT man said, oh, just weld a few patches over it. So we'll get the MOT man to weld a few patches over it. So I let him go because he wasn't prepared to do. I wasn't prepared to continue patching that chassis. It had to be done right. I didn't want my name against MOT style patches on that particular car. The rest of it looked okay, but they always do. They always look okay. Rolled on a couple of months, and then someone else got in touch with me. Just bought this Defender, and I'm told it just needs a couple of patches welded on the chassis. So I very, very, very politely and gently let him down that I'd already seen the car. It needs a new chassis, and this is roughly the cost. And with the Defenders, it's a little bit easier to do a chassis change than it is, let's say, on the series Land Rover cars, because you can lift the entire body off as one big unit. So it wasn't a horrific cost. In fact, the biggest part of the cost was probably going to be the chassis itself. And then he went away disappointed. Then it came back a third time with an email request, again, from a third person. So I rejected it a third time. So I don't know where it is now, that car. But the other thing that I do get, and it's happened on almost every project that's come into my workshop, it will come in for a specific set of work. The Lincoln Green two-door that I did a very, very long series on, that car came in for me to sort the axles, the brakes, get the engine running, and then hand it back to the customer who was going to take it into a body shop. What had happened was it had been in another workshop where the body frame had been taken off the chassis. The customer lost faith with that particular workshop, I think just because of the time it was taking. So they just threw it back together again and traded it down to me. So by the time it gets to me, it's just a rolling chassis of loose bolts and loosely assembled parts. So I rebuilt the pair of axles. They were fine. And by the time it came to running the brake lines through, which run across the bulkhead on the Range Rover, I said to the customer, look, there's no point me doing this because the bulkhead needs to come off because it's that rotten. So then it comes back. He said, well, how much then to sort the bulkhead out? And the project evolved from that point. And it ended up with a complete rebuild of that car. So I rebuilt everything from the window line, from the waistline downwards on that car. But it kind of came through in steps. Now, had that car come in right at the beginning, and that customer, it's a very, very good customer, had said to me, look, I want this body frame restoring, I would have said to him, look, it's rotten, absolutely rotten, and it's full of filler, and there's that many bad and dangerous repairs on it that really you're better off starting with something that is more together. And I've got, 3 A suffix Range Rovers sitting in my yard at the moment, which I own, and they were all in better condition than that Lincoln Green car, although the chassis was galvanised and the engine was good. But I could have lifted the engine out of that and put it into one of the A-Suffix cars I've got. It's had the original engine replaced with a diesel. So I could have lobbed that in there, rebuilt the body frame at a fraction of the cost, and then moved it on. And it's a shame that I wasn't aware of the end goal of that project right at the beginning, because I would have been able to better advise that customer. So now he's got a D suffix Range Rover. I think your latest one's D, isn't it? The one you did the canning stock route. Yeah, so this is a D suffix Range Rover, to which I have completely rebuilt the body frame. And it's a very nice car now. It's gone in for... He did originally want the patina wrap look to the outer body panels. And he quite liked the scuffed up Lincoln green paintwork. But has now changed his mind, and he's now having the whole thing painted in the paint shop. So we'll see that car on my channel again fairly soon, because it's coming back just for final fit and finish. I'm going to put the carpets in.
When I contacted you about my Range Rover, and I said to you that I was collecting it, I was going to spend a couple of days working on it, and that I was going to. This was, of course, long before canning was even thought of.
Yes.
What did you then? Did you think I was a bit crazy to just buy one almost blind, because it was during COVID, so I couldn't go and have a look at it? I just looked at the photographs and looked at some, did as much research as I could, and gave them the money and took the risk. What was your reaction to that when you heard me doing that?
I think because it's an Australian, it's been in Australia the majority of its life, although it is a UK manufactured car. It was shipped out fairly early in its life, wasn't it? So it spent its entire life.
It was sold new here.
Oh,
so
okay.
It was a fully assembled vehicle in the UK, and shipped and sold new in New South Wales.
Excellent. Right. So because it's been in a dry climate all its life, there's probably less risk involved in your purchase than, let's say, someone doing that in the UK. And then, you see, it boils down to price. So I don't know what you paid for that car. If someone in the UK bought a car, because there is a grey area in the values of these Range Rovers here in the UK. So you can get a project for 2,000 or 3,000. You can get a fully restored car, and you can see some crazy prices online at some of the dealers. But some of those cars have been beautifully rebuilt, and everything is better than it was when it left the factory. And then you end up with this area in between, in which there is a high risk that you'll end up with a car that's just been tarted up, and given a wipe over or a blow over with an oily rag, just to make it look good. And so when you look at the pictures, you think, "Hey, fantastic looking car," and you pay over the odds for what's effectively a project. So here in the UK, I would have been quite disappointed. But I think your purchase, when you first started talking about it, I thought, "Oh, this could be interesting." And when you first saw it, I thought, that's nice.
Yes.
And it looked together. It looked straight. It sat square.
It did. I was aware of, but again, through photographs, you can't actually see but you can see where there might be rust in the bottom of the door sills, where the A-pillar meets the floor. No rust. Okay, well, that's a good sign, etc. So I took a chance. I wish I'd had you there at the time. I would have said to you, have a look at these pictures. And
my father-in-law, South African, and I've got through my wife, I've got quite a big family in South Africa. And one of the guys out there is very much into Range Rovers and Land Rovers and sourcing out classic cars. And I help him. Michael, give you a shout out. And he picked up an Austin A40, which he picked up, I can't remember when he ran it was, it equated to about 350 quid. And this thing's immaculate. He's got to sort out the title, he's got to get it up and running. He's also picked up a Series 3 Land Rover, and he's constantly looking for Range Rovers. So he keeps finding them, tucked away here and there and everywhere. But he gets on all right with that. He is okay, and I help him over I use WhatsApp, and we talk about projects as and when he finds something. What do I think about it, Richard? And I'll give him honest opinions. Sometimes photographs can be very deceptive, and I think if you'd been in the UK, you'd have been very lucky with that car. I think in Australia, South Africa, it's a different case. You don't seem to struggle quite so much with the rust, but you do struggle with the dried out seals, the heat damage from the hard plastics, and modifications.
The dashboard, for example, none of the photographs that he took showed the major breaks in the dashboard, which was the worst part of the entire car, but it was
Yeah.
cleverly photographed. And of course, it was terribly, terribly neatly done with the seat belts carefully, and the seats were not particularly good. But all of these angles, you couldn't see that. In fact, the passenger seat was broken.
Yes.
The driver's seat was broken, but I could do a temporary repair for my trip. But it looked a lot better than it turned out to be. But again, lots of close-up shots of that patina that seems to be so. It's nice, but it wears off quickly, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. The exterior panels on your car, I liked. I liked the level of almost just where the paint had been worn and polished away.
Yes.
But I think you are in a very limited market. It's a very personal kind of requirement for someone that wants a car that looks age worn. There's a big following for it here in the UK. I go to, there's a local living car show where the cars are seen driving around. They do hill climbs and all sorts of things. And there's amazing machines there. And you see sort of 1910, 1920 kind of cars that have never been painted. And you're looking at that car and you're thinking, that is amazing. Never, ever, ever, ever paint that thing. But I think when it comes to a 1970s Range Rover, it's different. But then a Range Rover, I think, should look. Range Rovers don't wear their dents with pride. Serious Land Rovers do.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Yes. When you heard about us now, okay, you kept in touch. We kept in touch, and the Trans Australia drive was very, very successful. I had one minor problem with a noisy airbox. And and the only major work we did in Victoria before I drove it out, the things that we actually could see, okay, that is going to let us down, was the fuel system, which had been butchered, and we replaced all the fuel lines and put in a new fuel pump, but there was no other mechanical work done. Then I announced that I was going to do the Canning Stock route, which is, at the time, it was not my idea. It was somebody else's idea, and I cursed the man, I cursed the man until the day we actually finished the trip. I cursed him because the idea of taking a 47-year-old British Leyland product on an incredibly rough, punishing track.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of the idea? Did you honestly think it was going to make it?
Absolutely. I had complete faith in that car being able to do that journey. The main reason being is the early Range Rovers, I mean, pretty much any of the classic Range Rovers you can fix with a hammer. The majority of things can be easily fixed, so long as the core components are in good order, and as long as you'd already done your Trans Australia route, you had given it, one heck of a shakedown, really, just by driving it right the way across and back home again. So you already were aware of things like the bearings, the hubs, the axles, the differentials, the gearbox was in good order, the engine was strong. So then it's just a case of carrying the smaller components as spare parts. I know your light switch failed, but all you really needed was a small jumper, a small piece of wire about that long, which you just wedge into the back of the light switch, and the light switch had just stayed on permanently. So when I watched that episode where they failed, I was thinking, I could have fixed that in about a minute.
In about a minute, yes, yes. And of course, Heino really wanted to fix it because his Hilux had let us down so often, and I would not let him forget it. None of us would let him forget it. But the moment it broke down, everybody was pointing fingers at him because it was supposed to be the vehicle, the most reliable of all, and it was the least reliable.
Well, it was a rotten shame. It was a bit of a surprise, actually. I always knew that the Range Rover would do the job. I didn't realise that it would end up being quite the star it was, because it started out as a bit, I don't know what the viewers thought. I genuinely thought that car would make it to the end, but I imagine a lot of people would watch that and thought, if you want to go into the desert, take a Range Rover. If you want to get out, take a Hilux.
Take it.
So I never had any doubts. And the show just got more and more into how, not unbreakable, because bits did break on it, but how competent that car was at getting where it did go to. And it's not the first time it's done a long journey. Range Rovers have been doing long journeys since they were first created in 1970.
Yes, but not 47-year-old ones.
No, this is true. No, even worse, they were brand new ones. They hadn't had 47 years worth of ironing out all the little issues.
That's very true. I mean, I had a 72 model, and I did some extremely rough trips in that car, and It did let me down a few times, but we did the trips, and
Yes.
I used to hammer that vehicle. It was overloaded, and I couldn't get high capacity springs or anything. It was so difficult getting parts to make it perform better, and yet it survived.
Yeah.
And the fact that this one on the Canning survived so well is why I would do these gratuitous pans from the broken down Hilux onto the Range Rover, and then Rob, who was driving the Range Rover, kept on seeing me doing this. So on one of them, I remember I just kind of did it, and he's a very good storyteller, as Rob.
Yeah.
And because he was looking at me and he was thinking, okay, I need to. So as I did the pan onto the Range Rover, he just walked up to it and just kicked his tire and went,
Yeah, that's all right.
you know, you saw that, and that was completely spontaneous because he
Yes.
was now really into the fact that his car was the hero of the show. Until, of course, it broke down on the last day.
Did you regret not driving that? So I know you kind of handed over the reins.
I had to make a film.
Yeah.
I had to make the film, and I needed the vehicle. My vehicle had camera equipment, sound recording equipment.
Yeah.
I had all my computers in there, and also I've gone soft with age. I actually like convenient, and I would have been fine sleeping in a swag or something like that.
Yeah.
But the point is that my vehicle was set up for making a TV show. So.
Yeah.
And I would just hand cameras to people and say, point this at us, because we obviously didn't have a film crew. So I did need that support to do the filming. So I drove it about 5 times.
Yeah.
But do I regret not driving it the whole way? No, I don't. It was a magical experience. And of course, when you're outside it, you're looking at it, you're actually watching it.
It's a good-looking thing, isn't it? A good-looking car.
It's a beautiful looking car. So when I eventually did go to that thing about Rob not wanting to give me the keys, that was part joke, but it was part genuine because he kept on giving me a hard time about can I drive it? Can I drive it? And he would just like ignore me. And I was starting to get pissed off.
You're not getting in my car. And
then I thought, make it part of the story. It is part of the story. He doesn't want to relinquish the keys. So make it part of the story. Now, eventually I said to him, Rob, we're going to do it properly. So then when I did get into it, and I said to him, okay, you're going to be like a petulant child. Okay, and the Range Rover is going to disappear. And you're going to be like a petulant child. So we'll mount the camera here. Okay, Rob, go for it. So he does his thing, and I'm in the Range Rover, and I've got a camera pointing at me, but it's pointing through the rear vision mirror. So it's behind me, it's pointing through the rear vision, and you can see him throw himself onto the ground. But he knew how far the camera was away from him, and he knew he had to make this massive, grandiose, totally over-the-top, ridiculous, grandiose, threw himself on the ground because he knew the camera was that far away. And if you look very, very closely, you can see him in the rear vision mirror throwing himself on the ground. I think it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my entire life.
So you killed the illusion now. We all thought it was real.
No, but
it was.
But it was real. That's my point I'm making. It actually was real. It wasn't rehearsed. I just said to him, act like a petulant child. And he went so over the top. Mm-hmm. And then it continued for days. And that became
that was funny. Very funny. Very funny.
It was funny. Yeah. It was fantastic. Now, my Range Rover, as you know, is still for sale.
Yes.
And I could sell it by dropping the price. But at the same time, the main reason why I want to sell it is that I don't have any other plans and ideas for it, because how do you top the Canning stock route? I don't actually know.
Take it back to Africa. I don't know. It's a tricky one. You've already done all that, though, haven't you?
I have. I've already done Africa in a Range Rover, and again, I'm building a troop carrier which has got a nice shower system in it.
All the creature comforts of the 21st century.
I'm 63. I've done that. I've slept on the ground. I've slept in tiny little... I've done that. I deserve to be a little bit comfortable. Also, filming, I need the support of a car that's going to be able to back me up. So that's quite important too. And if I'm going out for 3 weeks filming, I need some comfort because I might want to stay an extra week. And if I'm comfortable, then I can. But if I'm uncomfortable and dirty and sweaty and then you know what I mean. The motivation is eroded with the level of discomfort.
I'm with
If
you
you know
on
what I
that.
mean.
I know exactly what
Yeah.
you mean.
So, what projects have you got in your workshop right now?
Right, okay. So aside from all of my cars, which just seem to be sitting there and waiting for year after year after year, I've got a very late Range Rover Classic in at the moment. So it's a 1994 soft dash. It's got the
Right.
kind of the it's the hybrid between the Range Rover Classic, the end of the Discovery 1 production, and the start of Discovery 2 production. So they've got this big soft dash kind of Discovery 2 setup inside them. It's also got a 300 TDI diesel engine in it, which the customer really wanted me to go over and sort a few electrical issues out with and sort the tailgates out so they didn't pop open and just have a look at that rust mount on the front inner wing that the MOT, the testing safety test chap here pointed out to him. Well, as with all of these things, it looks great underneath and you can't take the carpets out because they're all pinned down. But when you do, it was just, there was no flaws. So three weeks of welding on that car, I've got it back into one piece. We had to replace one of the inner wings at the front. I patched the other. I rebuilt both front footwells on that car. So all that work's done. The customer was due to come and pick it up on yesterday, and we had a conversation over the phone. And he said, well, because it's a Vogue SE, so it would have originally come with air suspension, and it's quite common in this country for people to replace that with coil springs, which is no real issue with that. The only problem is that the air suspension cars never came with a levelling strut at the back. So because of that, they have to put firmer springs on the back end of the car, which just destroys the comfort of the Range Rover, the legendary comfort. So the question was, how much do I think needs to happen to reinstate the air suspension on it? And all of the original components are on the car still, apart from the airbags. So I don't know, because I don't know why it was decommissioned. So this is my next week's work now, is to recommission air suspension on that car. And they are fairly straightforward. You do need a computer to plug in. And there's some open source software you can use to diagnose what's going on with the ECU on that. But I should be able to get there. A lot of the components are shared with the next generation of Range Rover, the P38. So there's that, and he's hopefully coming next Tuesday now.
I had a 95 soft dash Vogue SE with the air suspension, and I didn't keep it because the air suspension was so complicated and how it was so notorious for breaking. And for rough country use was a bit of a liability that I didn't keep it. But I loved that car. It was unbelievably comfortable. It just it was the 3.9 and a bit heavy on fuel, but not that heavy. But it had the cloth seats and the air level suspension system. It had a rear traction control which didn't work. It made a lot of noise, but nothing happened. But driving it off-road, I drove it over some very difficult off-road terrain with the automatic box, and it was remarkable that this car could do 120 k's an hour in sublime comfort. And yet over these, I did a thing with a whole lot of logs, and I saw these Hiluxes and things bouncing,
boom, boom, wheels coming off the ground,
and I'm going, oh. It was walking up.
they are a step up from the standard Range Rover Classic. The air suspension cars are beautiful things to try. You can get so the core components that fail typically are the airbags. They've got a life of about a decade, and we're dealing with 30-year-old cars now. In fact, the airbags I've taken off this car were last changed in 2003, and they're all showing signs of extreme wear. So I suspect the reason it was taken off the road was one of the airbags blew up, and the owner thought, I can't be bothered to spend whatever it is per corner. Put springs on it, it's easier. Maybe it let him and his missus down on a cold, dark motorway in the pouring rain or something, and his wife said, I'm never getting in it again. I don't know, but I've not been able to find anything else wrong with it apart from the missing spring. Missing airbag. So I'm rather hoping that when it all gets connected back together again, it's okay. But yes, the ride comfort on those air suspension cars is brilliant because they're lighter than the P38 that followed it on, the next generation Range Rover. and they're less
Yes.
complicated because the P38
Yes.
is just horrific when it comes to electronics. The Range Rover then
Right.
becomes quite straightforward. So you can buy little diagnostic boxes now, which you plug into the ECU, and it just resets all the codes for you, and you just pick up and off you go again.
Okay.
So you can pick those up for a few quid. And airbags now are being remade by Dunlop, so they're much better quality airbags. But the only thing that is not really available at the moment is the original pump, which was Dunlop originally, and the replacements that are being made just don't seem to last. And so eventually they kind of pack up, and the performance disappears on those things. Then it takes 5 minutes to make every change you need to make. But there's lots of ingenuity out there for the air suspension cars. There are people that have engineered little valve blocks with 4 little Schrader valves, accessible under the bonnet. So you can pull into a petrol station, gas station, whatever, and pump, using the air pump up the airbags, and they stay. So you can set the height as you want it. So you don't need the ECU to control it. So they've got all of these little kind of workarounds in case there is unreliability. But a fully functional system with the ECU that when you get to a certain speed drops the car a little bit just to make it a little bit more aerodynamic, hug the road a little bit more, less rock and roll. It's a really good system when it works. So this is the second EAS system that I've played with, and I've got another 2 waiting, 2 other soft dash cars with customers saying, "Can you put EAS back on my car?" Yes.
So now tell me something. This is a question that I've been having, and you are the guy to answer it for me. So I don't have a project for my Range Rover, but I actually want a daily driver. Actually,
Yeah.
And I don't commute, but I just want something a little bit more comfortable than a Troopy, maybe a bit smaller, and just kind of for running around. But I want something nice. So you might say, well, I can use my Range Rover, but my Range Rover, it has no power steering.
Mm-hmm.
It has no air conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
You know what an early Range Rover, how rough they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're rough
Agricultural.
and noisy.
Yeah.
That's the right word. So I couldn't really use my Range Rover as a daily driver, particularly if it got hot in summer here, which wouldn't be very pleasant. The value of it is probably similar to the value of a late 90s soft dash air suspension, well maintained and even restored 4-door.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think I'm ridiculous in thinking about swapping my old one for something that would be more practical, even though it isn't as nice as the 2-door?
Not at all. My own car it's a 1993 Vogue 3.9 automatic. I've had that car now for 14 years. When I bought it, it had done 40,000 miles, whatever that is in kilometres, I don't know. It's now done 220,000 miles. It's let me down once when the starter motor seized up because it's automatic. I couldn't do anything with it. So it's the only ride of shame that car has ever had. I took it off the road I took it off for a road
like that expression.
Yeah, ride of shame. The Stags only have one ride of shame as well, and I've had that 30-something years. Yeah. I took it off the road when I started the business because I wanted to restore it properly. I wanted to, rather than when it's your own car, you kind of just patch it and then get it back on the road again because it's your own car. You could never sell it because it's your own car. In order to sell it, it's got to be rebuilt. So I thought, right, I'm never going to sell it. I thought, let me start rebuilding it. So I've started at the back end of the body frame, and I got about halfway up it, and I just ran out of time. It's just customers' cars always come first, so it's just sitting there. However, I'm desperate to get that thing back on the road. I love driving it. It was effortless. I could get in that car from London, drive down to the south of France, which I did with my family on a number of occasions, and get out of it as fresh as I got in it because it was so comfortable to drive. The upright driving position, just the comfort of that car. It's thirsty, but then you offset that cost against a new car, then you're driving an old 30-year-old luxury car. Okay, it's still a bit agricultural because it's still got the basic underpinnings of the original. But there's more soundproofing in the later classic Range Rovers. There is air conditioning, which is very effective. And they always needed it because the amount of glass you've got on those things, it just
Yeah.
turns them into a greenhouse.
I was driving back from Melbourne to here. It was middle of winter, and I had to actually have a jersey, and I wedged it in the window above, on my right.
Yeah.
I wedged it in there because I was cooking in there because the vent wasn't working properly, the fan wasn't working properly. So I would crack the window, but if I cracked the window very much, I would just get cooked. So I'd have to wind the window all the way up, put in a shirt or jersey or something to stop the sun from hitting me. It's like driving a greenhouse.
It is. And so the air conditioning on the later cars, it's very good. And my personal preference is I actually prefer the hard dash cars. I like the kind of the rugged looks of the early cars, but it is very much my opinion. There's lots of people, there's a really big following for the run-out soft dash cars, and they made those from, I think, the middle of 1994, and the very last versions were registered here in 1996. So they made them for a relatively short period of time.
Yeah.
There are a number of unique features on those cars that were only on the soft dash Range Rovers, and they were never used even on the Discos, the Discoveries. But they're comfortable cars. They're nice. They came either in just a Range Rover format, the poverty model, or they came in a Vogue SE. They didn't do the soft dash Vogue. So when you get the Vogue SE, you do end up with the air conditioning, the cruise control, the electric seats. Cloth seats, oddly enough, was an option on those things. I'm fairly sure of that. I might be wrong.
Mine had cloth seats. I don't like the leather seats. I think the cloth seats are nice.
No, my car, my Daily had cloth seats when I bought it, and I converted it to leather. And biggest regret of my life. I want to put cloth seats back in it because there's so much leather seats. They're hot and sticky in the summer and cold and hard in the winter. It's ridiculous.
I don't get leather seats in the cars. No. They smell nice. They smell nice for about 7 months after you buy a car, and then no point left.
I'll probably put cloth seats back in my car at some point. I have got a set. Right. I just need to go back into it. But yes, I would certainly go for a late classic Range Rover. I think that they are very competent vehicles, and I think with a little mechanical understanding of, because all of the late cars came with the EFI setup. And the hot wire EFI setup is fairly straightforward. They're still running with a distributor. It's still the venerable Rover V8. There's nothing particularly complex about them. Here in the UK, we're very well supplied with parts for those cars, so it's more than achievable. I would happily run a late classic on a daily basis. I think the early classics, you're right, the early classics are just a bit too agricultural. They're like driving around in a fast series Land Rover with coil springs on it.
Yes, because when I got my 110 V8 in '89, it was a lot more comfortable. It was a county version, a lot more comfortable, a lot quieter, a lot nicer to drive than my Range Rover, and it was a 110. So that's how agricultural the early two doors are. And this thing that I drive, I like driving it around because I like throwing it around the roundabouts because it's that boat feeling you got. And anything else will fall over. This thing just kind of leans,
just keeps going,
goes, until eventually you hear the tires saying, "Hey, I'm going to let go any second."
When you hear that noise, you've got the fine line between backing off and not backing off.
Absolutely. Very, very fine line. Yes. So it's very much a driver's car. And when I say that, I mean you drive the thing. It does nothing for you. So as a daily driver, it's not ideal.
No.
So that was my motivation, is that I don't have any filming projects for it. But at the same time, I keep looking at it and saying, you can't get rid of it. But then again, it's just sitting there. It's not
just sitting there doing nothing. There are ways. So if you went back to, I think, 1990, Land Rover, they built the CSK model, which was effectively, it was the model that followed, the model that followed on with the 3.9 and everything. And they put all of that running gear with the automatic gearbox, the electric windows, the extra sound deadening and so forth. They put that into a two-door.
In the CKD, that's the Spencer King Memorial.
That's version, the Memorial version, and I think they made 200 of them. Those
got to be very, very valuable, though, aren't they?
Well, you say that, but people seem to rate the really early agricultural cars. They rate them more than the CSK cars, which is, I quite like the CSK cars because they've got the level of comfort of the four-door, but they've got the looks of the two-door. And there's There's a number of companies here in the UK that will take a two-door car and there's a word that's turned up, resto mod, and they will put later underpinnings onto a two-door. One of my customers wanted particularly to do a resto mod. We talked at great length about it. He bought a complete car from, I think this one came from Portugal, left-hand drive. And we can register those cars, convert them. I've done a couple of conversions now on left-hand drive to right-hand drive, and re-register them in the UK because they were all built in the UK. So registering them is actually not that much of a chore. The licensing, the company, the government agency that does it, they do their best to stop you, but there are ways around it. Preventer of vehicle registrations. But one thing I did suggest to him was, why don't you get a similar aged four-door car from the UK, which will probably be end of life as far as the body frame is concerned. But as far as the chassis and running gear is concerned, it's probably still serviceable. It's probably still got life in it. And then drop the two-door body shell onto it. And then you end up with all the modern running gear. You end up with the 3.9 or even the 4.2 if you want to get berserk running gear, and the automatic ZF gearbox, which is, okay, agricultural by modern standards, but for Range Rover Classics, it's as smooth as anything with the Borg-Warner transfer box on it. And you got the Bose self-leveling strut. You could even have air suspension on it and ABS. So then you end up with a very high-end two-door, similar to the CSK. And it's achievable. It's a wedge of work, but it does bring. If you can do that, then you can take an original two-door like you've got. What you would probably need to start off by doing would be to get it down to its bare body frame, and because the later car from 1986 onwards, all of the body frames were completely welded. Nothing was bolted together. So the whole body frame was welded. Yeah, from 86 onwards. And that's when they stopped sending out the completely knocked down kits to the far reaches of the planet.
That explains it. I never knew why they'd stopped doing that. That explains it.
And then every single body shell was then made in Solihull and assembled in Solihull, and the complete cars were then shipped out. And I think it was because, and he was saying about two-doors, from the late 60s when the prototypes were around, and I think it was the second or third prototype, was pretty much there as far as looks and styling was concerned. But they launched in June 1970, and up until the early 1980s, very, very, very few changes. Virtually nothing was done to internal comfort at all. And it was when a real, because they were trendsetters, they started their own marketplace. Nothing existed before. I know in America they'll say, oh yeah, well the Jeep Wagoneer was here. Well, yeah, so was the Series 3 station wagon and the Series 2A station wagon. And they were on cart springs and they were seven-seaters or whatever. The Range Rover, for being a fast, coil-sprung off-roader, was the granddaddy or grandmother of all 4x4s, all sports utility kind of vehicles that are out there today. It's its fault, I'm afraid. And everything's become bloated since then. So I think that the Range Rover Classic is still usable. You still need to go there. But you can update an early car. You can change the running gear fairly easily because it's pretty much chop and change stuff from a later car. If you had a later donor, then you could drop engine gearbox in.
I've got a Parenti gearbox. The 3.5 is smooth. It runs very, very nicely. It's just the whole body shell is just kind of like, as I said, I think in 150 loose rivets flying in close formation. That's how it feels when it drives. And you can put I've got some soundproofing in there, but honestly, you'd have to put 1.5 tons of it in there to actually make a difference.
You do.
So I'm thinking, well, maybe just look out for a nice one and then perhaps do a swap, because I don't want to get into the restoration business. I'm not good at it, and I'm not patient enough. It's very,
very. I mean, I love doing it, and it's a choice for me to do it. And there's lots. I get good business from it because there are many, many people like yourself out there. They want the end product. They want the journey, but they don't necessarily want to get their hands dirty. They don't want to be taking lumps out of their fingers in the process, which is why I try and bring that special kind of service to my customers. A late Range Rover would be absolutely ideal. Don't go for the LSE though. I think the LSE, for some reason, they lost the looks on the long wheelbase version. the 108-inch Range Rover. I don't know if you get those in Australia.
I don't think they were sold here.
I
remember. I know exactly which one. They're long wheelbase, basically.
That's it. They've got more space in
Yeah.
the rear for the rear passengers, but everything else is exactly the same. So you're still
The
cramped up at
proportions
the
are
front.
wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, the proportions are not right. But that whole thing, when I bought my 110, I bought a brand new 110, is because I remember saying to Gwen, I have just spent the last decade lying on my back in my workshop with shit falling into my eyes, fixing this thing, and I've had it. I've had enough. And so I don't want to go through that again. I don't have any desire to go through that again. So I am, in terms of vehicles, I like building Overlanders, but I build them on relatively new vehicles. And then, like the Africa vehicle's got 500,000 kilometers on it, but I had all of these other people coming in and saying, what can we do? What can we do? We'll do it for you, because they get some good business out of the publicity. Perfect. But I can't do that with an old Range Rover.
No, you need patience.
Yeah, and I don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, when I'm doing one of these bigger projects, I get to the stage in my workshop on my own where, if you do watch my videos, and I apologise for the swearing, I'm on my own in my workshop and I can't edit all the swearing out. But I don't
it's
swear.
part of the character. It's part of your character.
But
if you didn't swear, if you didn't swear, Richard, I would think, what's the matter with the guy? Is he stuck? Something wrong with him. His dog died because you're not swearing. So no, keep going.
Well, but I don't swear in company though. That's the weird thing. I'm not sure I've sworn in this entire. Well, no, I don't think I have yet. I've kept me best behaviour on. But yes, it's one of those things in the workshop. Yeah, I do swear. So the videos do contain swearing. But I think that's fairly normal when you're working on the cars.
Yes.
Well, the point I was going to make was that when I'm working on something where I'm not expecting it to become a weldathon and it's turned into a weldathon, I think, do you know what? I've had enough of this. So sometimes you need to close that metaphorical garage door and go and do something else. Now, on a big project, that works really well. So on the Lincoln Green car and also the bobtailed car that I unbobtailed, which was a massive project. That started during lockdown. There's so many things to do, and the organisation that's up here means that I can stop welding and move on to, I don't know, refurbishing door glass frames or rebuild a loom or maybe strip an engine down and start cleaning it. Just do something completely different. The trick with any of these projects, whether you are in it for a business like I am or whether you're an amateur that's out there, is to not get bogged down with it. Don't let the project become too big for you. Don't let it dominate you, because when it starts doing that, it's no longer any fun. You've got to move away from the thing that you're not enjoying. But then, as a paradox, when I go out and I help lots of customers in their own workshops, 2 or 3 at the moment, where they keep the car themselves, they do the majority of the work. They call me up to go out and work on the car, the bits they don't want to do. So I'm doing a Rover P6. There's a Range Rover, F suffix Range Rover, 1976 Range Rover. And I'm doing a Triumph Stag via video conferencing. So the chap's got the Stag in his own garage, and I act as a consultant for him because I understand the cars. And he's rebuilding that car from a bare body shell. It is literally a 2,000-piece jigsaw. So I do all of these things. The key thing I say to customers when I go out and visit them is, when we're doing a project, which bit are you really not looking forward to doing while I'm here? And they'll tell me, this is the thing I really am, I'm anxious about doing this job. So I'll say, great, let's do that right now. Because the longer that hangs around in a project, the more it's dwelling in the back of your head. And the closer you get to it with each other job you do. So the best thing to do is get it out of the way. And especially while I'm there, because if it stumps the pair of us, then it needs more thought. But the best thing to do sometimes is take the thing that you really don't want to do and do it. And then you can enjoy the project. When you get to the end of that, and as I used to with project management, working in IT, when you get a great sense of satisfaction that surges through you when you achieve something that you really didn't want to do. I've done it. Yes. And that's one thing that I do try and push out there. And they're only machines, let's face it. Apart from automatic gearboxes, of course, they're not machines. They were designed by aliens, those things. Do not understand them. But anything else, I can understand. I can take it apart. I can rebuild it. I can, logically work out how that thing functions, even if I've never done it before. Logically work it out, take it apart. If it's past rebuilding, then at least I know. There's no point just kind of chucking good money after bad, just by ripping something
I must.
apart.
Listening to you now, I can appreciate a little more what you do, because I watch your videos and I think, man, you have patience. You show some pictures of something that to me is just a mess, forget it, walk away type scene, and you say, no, it's actually not that difficult. We're going to start with this, and then a month later, I come back and look at some stuff, and oh crikey, you've done a lot. I've been watching your soft dash one.
Yeah.
And thinking, yeah, I had a soft dash, and I really liked that car, and that was kind of what gave me the thought, maybe I should get one, try and find a nice one, that's got a good service hit record and loved by an enthusiast with a good record, and value-wise, not that different from my two-door.
No, they're not. Here in the UK, we're going through all of this ultra-low emission zone stuff at the moment, where you can't drive a polluting car into a city because you're killing people unless you pay money. Sorry to go political there, but this is so. A lot of people now they are moving away from older cars, and they're buying newer cars so they can drive in and out of the city. Well, I don't drive in and out of cities. That's fixed that problem. But by driving the older car, I just honestly, I don't know if you get the problem in Australia. I don't know if you've got this polluting tax in Australia, or you're Perth, aren't you?
Yes, we don't have emissions charges to drive into Perth. No.
So more or less, you can get a V8 Range Rover. And you will find that while in the UK they seem to rust more than any other car for the age of the car. The early two-doors, they rotted with a passion. They really did. But when you look at a car that's 45 years old and it's rotted with a passion, you think, well, okay, it's 45 years old. It was designed to last 10 years, perhaps. But when you start digging into things like that soft dash, and I've got another two soft dashes coming in, and they're not as nice as this one, they'll require probably a little bit more work. I think even in Australia, here in the UK, because like I say, the prices are dropping on the soft dashes. There was a stage where they were seen as the pinnacle of the Land Rover development. Personally, I think the cars from 1989 through to about 1993 were the pinnacle. I'm not a big fan of soft dashes, but there are lots of people that are, and that's not meant, to dissuade you from a soft dash. But I like the hard dash cars, and 1989 cars seem to last better than 1993 cars. By the time you get into the soft dash cars, the 94 through 96, early 96, they just seem to rot a little bit more in more unusual places than the 98 cars, or sorry, 89 cars. So it's almost like as the car drew towards the end of its production run, and bear in mind it's 25 years in production with very few changes. It was still running on the same chassis, still had the same axles. Okay, they upgraded the axles to put anti-roll bars and vented disc brakes on the front. The whole thing from start to end pretty much was the same. Yeah, if personally, if I was looking for a car, it would be something 3.9. Because while the 3.9 V8 is not as smooth as the 3.5, it's just got that little bit of extra power, a little bit of extra torque. I think that the manual gearbox on the 3.9 is utterly pointless unless you are doing some serious off-roading. Because you get the hill descent control using the manual gearbox that you won't get. You used your automatic going downhill, and it was quite scary, wasn't it?
I'm not buying this for driving off-road. I've got a Land Cruiser for that.
You went down, when you had your automatic, it's quite scary when you go downhill because the car does run away with you.
Oh, you're using
it goes a lot quicker. So the automatic gearbox for general day-to-day use and anything apart from serious off-roading is just so beautifully suited to those cars. The interior comfort, cloth seats especially, they're like sofas. They are the best sofas that I've ever sat on, ever. The amount of sound deadening on the later last run-out models of the so pretty much from 1989 onwards, they ran the sound deadening right up to the top of the bulkhead. And it really did cut down on an incredible amount of noise that came from the engine bay. The transmission, the automatic transmission, is, well, silent by comparison to the 4-speed gearbox that you've got. And such that the noisiest thing that I find on my 3.9, my 93 Vogue, the noisiest thing at motorway speeds is the noise around the windscreen pillars. So at the top corner is the windscreen, where it goes to the door frame. That's the noisiest part. You can hear that. And you can hear the exhaust as well.
Okay.
Can't really hear the engine. You can't hear the transmission.
Yeah.
So they become, okay, they're still old cars, but you can put up with a bit of wind noise around a windscreen pillar. You can get, there are these vent things that you put over the top of the window that allow you to open the window a crack and, not allow all the rain and everything to pour in. Wind noise will be probably your biggest concern. It's not going to bother you. Yeah. It's not going to bother you. Economy, forget it. It's miles per gallon.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
My 3.9 around town, and I ran my car for a very, very, very long time on LPG. We were able to do that. So I did 150,000 miles on LPG, and my average across that entire time on LPG was 17.8 miles to the gallon. And because it's slightly cheaper petrol, it kind of equated to somewhere around the high 20s MPG. And I became a little bit like modern EV owners. They get range anxiety. I got range anxiety with the LPG. And it started to bog me down a little bit because not everywhere sells it. The last few years I was driving that thing, I actually started using it on petrol more. Two things I noticed. On a 200-mile journey, it would cost me £5 more in petrol, so a pint of beer, than it would have done in LPG. So on a good run, I was probably getting 23, 24 miles to the gallon out of it. Now, I don't drive like an idiot, but nor do I drive...
That's not terrible.
It's not terrible, no. I'd be driving around... I mean, the motorway network here in the UK is reasonably good, but it does get snarled up quite a lot.
Yeah.
And I was driving... let's say around the 70 mile an hour mark. So I was lane 2, lane 3 where I needed to be. And certainly not in, truck bothering territory. So I wasn't driving 55 to 60 to achieve that. And I was getting towards mid-20s MPG. I was thinking, this is ludicrous, having this range anxiety for this alternative of very clean fuel LPG. Just run it on petrol. For the mileage I'm doing on this thing, on that car, now nothing, but back then I was probably down to about 4,000 or 5,000 miles a year. At the peak, I was 12,000 to 15,000 miles a year. So it's certainly, and like I say, it's never let me down once. Starter motor, which I probably could have changed with the pouring rain at the roadside, but I had the wife with me, and Jackie wasn't. She wasn't being very bloody car. When are you going to get a new car? Swore. There's the swear word. Around town it's not as bad as a V12 E-Type. You're going to be 13 or 14 miles to the gallon round town, but on a run you should get mid-20s. But
I'm definitely going to think. I just think about it. I have your approval, so I'm definitely going to. It was an idea I had while watching your soft dash build, and that was your inspiration too. So that's why I thought I'd bring you on.
Oh, fantastic!
Ask you that question straight up. Do you think this is a good idea? And you approve of the idea, so I'm certainly going to.
Big thumbs up from me.
Okay.
Big thumbs up. No, absolutely.
All right.
And with current trends and everything else like that, by running that older car, it's more or less seen as, without using the word green, it's good to the environment because you're not driving a new car. You're using a car way beyond its original life. And you're continuing to use it.
But there's something about driving them. There's something about them. There's just, just something about them that unless you're in love with them, you can't really understand it. And apart from the fact that they are old cars for their time, where they were very advanced cars, but they're just plain beautiful things to look at, and I like to look at my car when I'm on my way to get into it, whether it's from getting a pint of milk or on a trip. I like looking at the car.
There is a sense of theatre with a classic Range Rover, I think.
There is. Yes,
it's getting in it. It's the clunk of the door. It's getting the key to slide into the ignition.
But I'll wrap it up like this. There is a sense of theatre, but the trouble is with the two-door, it's a sense of theatre followed very quickly by a sense of torture. I don't want the torture. I just want the theatre.
I can understand that. I can relate to that completely. I can relate.
There you go.
Would I rather drive a 93 Vogue or a 1972 two-door? Depends on the distance.
Depends on where you're going, because if you were going to a car meet, you'd be in the 72. No question about it. You'd be in Diane, your dad's vehicle. Yes. Yeah. But then if you were actually doing a job and you needed to get somewhere, you wouldn't
93 all day long, every day, day long.
Absolutely. And that's where I'm at too. Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your participation. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.